Well, Andy, I'm sorry to report that we are live. Welcome, everyone. It's time to talk some football with Andy Herman as we do each and every day after the game. And whoo, baby, what an embarrassment there at Lambeau Field from the Green Bay Packers. Andy, we'll just jump right in, shall we? Normally I ask how you're doing, but at 6 o'clock the day after the game, I don't really care. I mean, we've all had to work through our emotions at this point. I just want to get down to it. Run defense. And to put it succinctly, what the hell, man?
What the hell is a great way to look at it. I think the questions or the comments have been, surrounding, well, is it scheme? Is it talent? Is it players not executing? And I think the fair answer is yes. It is all of the above.
Yes.
And, you and I both have talked on multiple occasions. People wanted to talk about wide receivers. People wanted to talk about what they should draft, what they should go after. From the end of last season up until today, at this moment, I've been steadfast in saying the 1A need on this team has been help for Kenny Clark and somebody next to him. So they haven't addressed it. The Trayvon Hester, surprise, didn't work out after a minimum deal and after a ho-hum career, if you will.
Yeah.
Willington Prevalon, undrafted free agent, hasn't exactly set the world on fire so far. So they haven't gone out and got the players along the defensive line to help. So I think there's some blame to be put on the front office. As far as the talent on the team, Kenny Clark, Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, the guys that you need to go out and be studs have not been to the same level as they were a season ago. Now, maybe injuries are playing a part. Maybe there's extenuating circumstances. I don't know, but I can tell you it's not the same as it was a season ago for any of those guys. Some players more than others. Players that they needed to step up, Kingsley Keke, Rashawn Gary, Christian Kirksey coming in, some of those type of players haven't fully stepped up the way that I think a lot of people, including those in the front office, would have liked. And then I think you can point to some scheme things too. Yes, Mike Pettin did more heavy personnel this week, but also
for all the good it did, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think you can point to all three and say, you know what, there's concerns in all three, and I think there's blame all the way to go around.
What's interesting too is so you can't, obviously the trade deadline is tomorrow, thank God, so we can stop talking about it. But you can only do so much at the trade deadline. The time that you construct your roster is in the offseason. There's no magic bullet you're going to trade for to fix the run defense. So that, to me, comes back to the coaching and the scheme and how they're calling things, which is what I tried to ask Matt about today. But he was, very well coached and did a lot of coach speak about self-scouting, etc. But to me, that's the crux of the issue here, because of everything you just talked about. It was incumbent upon Mike Pettin to change things and or get some kind of improvement out of the guys on hand. Now, to your point, Z's been on the injury report pretty constantly this year. Yep. Kenny Clark obviously missed a good chunk of time. We saw last year how he needed to round into shape as the year went on. You don't want that, obviously, but here he is again, coming off of an injury after a long layoff and probably, getting his legs underneath him. You don't want it. No one wants to admit that, but it's probably the truth. But when he's getting double teamed a whole bunch, as you say, you need guys to step up. And when we get back to the coaching, for me, we talked about it last week. We've talked about it for the last few weeks. Montravius Adams has been playing pretty damn well on early downs. And I think he played less than 10 snaps yesterday.
Like 6.
In favor of guys like Lancaster, who also is coming back from injury. Guys like Lowry, who is constantly on the ground. To me, that's where I kind of scratch my head and think, okay, well, you've gone now from January up to this point. And as you said, we talked about it all off season. Everyone wanted to talk about wide receivers, and coming into the season, people said, well, what's your one worry with this team? It was always, look, I don't know how the run defense is any different.
Right.
And it absolutely came back to bite them yesterday. And they've been doing what they did last year in the sense of, yes, often the offense can rise up, but also they do have stretches where they contain the run. I don't think they've ever shut down someone's running game, but they can contain it and get them into a passing situation. And that's when they can pin their ears back, maybe run some exotic blitzes, etc. But the one time they got him pinned back yesterday on the 2nd and 19, they pretty much gave up the majority of it on the next play. So it's, to me, I've spent all day being frustrated about the run defense, about as frustrated as I was all offseason long. And to your point, other than coaching, because that's the only thing that's going to fix this. It's not going to be a question of getting new blood in there, because the blood they have is what they deemed worthy and or necessary this offseason.
I agree.
So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I don't want to harp on it too much because I know it'll be hashed ad nauseum, but it is probably the number one headline coming out of that game because the entire game came down to the fact that the Packers couldn't stop a nosebleed. I mean,
Yeah, I
essentially
mean,
they got pushed around.
at some point at Tampa Bay, you can say, you know what, a few weird things went, the wrong way with the pick six and stuff and things like that, and it got out of hand. And maybe you could say, well, the conditions in this one made the game closer than it should have been because it really mitigates the advantage that you have between Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins and Minnesota not having pass rushers and things like that. But guess what? You play in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and you play another game every year in Chicago. 9 of your 16 games every year could be crappy weather, and then not even mentioning playoffs and those sort of things. So yeah, November, December, January, you're a Green Bay Packer. You better be ready to play in crappy football, and that better be some sort of identity within your team. Because if it's not, then you probably haven't set up your team correctly for what you need to do to succeed in Green Bay.
I'm glad you brought that up because it is kind of surprising in the sense that Ron Wolf made it his mission to make sure he had a team that was built for November and December. Yep. And I do think Ted got a bit away from that. And I certainly think Gutekunst hasn't seemingly put that kind of team on the field. Now, you can quibble about what they like, RAS-wise or the types of guys, the football guys they bring in. But at some point, you need players that rally to that kind of occasion, who show a little bit of life, who relish. I mean, yesterday I saw a dome team more up for a game in the elements than the team that actually plays in the elements.
Yeah,
that to me was the mystifying thing.
I think that's got to be, such a hard thing about, roster building at this point is because, if you get the wrong playoff matchup and you go and you've got a team that's set up for 5 wide receivers and you play at Lambeau and in the snow, you're probably screwed. And then on the flip side, you build a power running team and you go and you play the greatest show on turf in St. Louis back in the day or something like that. And you're screwed in that regards too. So I think it's difficult. But the weird thing to me is that it does seem that there is some cognizant effort on the front office's standpoint. You go out and you don't get the Brian Burnses of the world. They want these big physical edge rushers and Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, right? They go out and then the second round, they draft a bruising halfback in AJ Dillon. They go out and they get these pieces that it seems that they have at least some recognition that they want to be ready for cold weather football. But then when it shows up, we just didn't see that level of intensity on the field. So it's not easy. I'm not saying it is, but obviously, I don't think we give them a pass on it either.
Joel has a super chat. Thanks, buddy, for the support. Hard to win scoring 14 versus Minnesota and 10 versus Tampa Bay. Well, that is true. And I sense Joel is leaning towards they need to bring in a wide receiver here. I see you, Joel. You think you're sneaky. But to my mind, it's like, well, yeah, it's also hard to win in Tampa Bay when you throw 2 interceptions back to back and allow them to score each time. It's like you're giving away points and then making things even worse and easier for Tampa Bay to pin its ears back. As far as the Minnesota game, well, they went toe to toe for the first half. Yeah. It's just, as Rodgers said, it was like a crazy, weird game where, you look up and all of a sudden there's like 3 minutes left in the first half and you've only had the ball twice.
And how
that's unnatural in the game of football.
And how disjointing and disappointed does it have to be as an offense where you go down, you get the ball, immediately go down, drive and score a touchdown. You give your defense a 7-0 lead, and then it immediately gets evaporated. You go down, you score another 7 points, you take a 14-7 lead. And basically by the time you get the ball again, not including the one play before half, which was, in my opinion, the right move not to go for it at that point.
Oh, 100%. I couldn't believe people were like, oh, why aren't they going for it? They had no timeouts. They tried to stop them on defense and took their timeouts on defense. But once they got down at 1st and goal, talking about the Vikings, like, yeah, no, you just kneel it and just get out of there.
Especially when you have to probably get to the Vikings 20 to have a normal shot at a field goal.
At minimum, with that win, trying to kick in it. Yeah, no, I'm with you. But then, yeah, to extend your point, yes. And then to turn around and the next time you touch the ball, you're down 21-14 when all you've done is march the field on these guys.
Every time.
Although I will say, I want to get your take on this because this is all anecdotal. I haven't gone back to even watch the game more than twice yet, which I usually today I spend a lot more time trying to dissect it. And we'll obviously get more information from the coach's tape. But it really seems like once they do get down, especially if they're in the second half, man, they get pass happy. Like instantly when all of a sudden they're down 2 scores in the fourth quarter and then they're trying to run the ball.
Yeah.
Like it just seems that LaFleur, I don't know if he gets flustered. I don't know if he's just searching. I don't know what it is, but man, they're great when things are in sync, and they're basically staying ahead of the sticks or, the game is at least competitive, etc. But once there's like any semblance of, I don't know, I guess diversity, a challenge, what have you, man, they really seem to stub their toe on offense.
Well, this game in particular against the Vikings was a perfect example of that, because you go back to week 1, outside of the final kneel down at the end of the game, they had 9 drives against Minnesota. 7 they scored on. The other 2, they had 1 punt, and then they had 1 drive where they failed at the 1-yard line. So they moved it down to the 1-yard line on that drive and turnover on down. So 8 of the 9 drives, they drove it down and either scored or should have scored on the drive. Then in the first 2 drives in this game, same exact thing. They go down, score touchdowns on both of them. So when things were good, or they were even or ahead, they go basically 9 out of 11, 10 out of 10 out of 11 they should have scored. And then all of a sudden they get behind by a touchdown, and 3 straight either turnover on downs or punt situations where they seemingly can't move the ball at all just because they're down by a score or 2. So I don't know what other conclusion that you can, come up with in that situation. And even if you do go pass happy, this is a defense that is devoid of pass rushers and doesn't have corners basically. And even if you do decide to run the ball, like, you should have been able to move the ball. It just seems that when things get a little bit tighter, everything gets a little bit bunched up.
Yes. And that's funny you say that, because Zimmer, I think Rodgers mentioned it in his post game. They had that 1 snap of man on Devontae, but for the most part, and they found him, but like for the most part, he said it was cover 2 almost the majority of the day. And it's funny because they got enough on the ground in the first half so they could move the sticks and they could stay ahead and blah, blah, blah. But in the second half, they couldn't run the ball to save their life.
No.
And then that was even against cover 2 with a 4-man front. Like, they weren't run blitzing for the most part. They were only rushing 4, and the Packers still couldn't get movement. That to me was like, people want to talk about Aaron Jones missing, etc., which I think is valid. He's obviously a supreme talent. But man, the Vikings did a great job controlling the line of scrimmage up front. And that meant it's 2nd and 10, it's 2nd and 8. And you're passing into this cover 2 shell. Rodgers finally found MVS on that corner route. He found Sternberger in the turkey hole, so to speak. He also found Devontae there on a couple of those. But for the most part, man, they couldn't make anything happen down the field. And that was a real credit, I thought, to the way Zimmer called his game.
And, really quick on that too, I don't know what more, you would need to see as just whether it's a GM or whatever, the Packers, to see exactly how important inside linebacker can be in a game, because against Tampa Bay, Levante David and that entire linebacking group was phenomenal, and they wrecked the game for Green Bay. And this game, Minnesota basically had 3 good players left on this team: Eric Kendricks, Harrison Smith, and Anthony Harris. And Eric Kendricks was another 1-man wrecking crew. Not only all over the place. One game, but then the play on cover 2 where he's covering Devontae.
Where he takes Devontae down the field, that's crazy. Now, I will say, I'm going to give my quibble here with Rodgers. Another flick of the wrist throw rather than stepping into it. If he just gets it even a foot out in front of Devontae, that's probably a huge gain, if not a touchdown. But instead, it's behind him a little bit, hits him on the shoulder pad. I mean, there's good coverage there. Don't get me wrong. It's impressive that he ran down the field there. But Devontae's got a good half step on him if the ball is just placed a little bit further out in front of him. I understand that's a quibble, especially in that wind. I get it, so don't come after me. But let's look ahead to this game with the 49ers now that we can look at the Vikings game for what it was. It was certainly abnormal in the sense that the wind, like, you can talk about the cold and you need to be up for it, etc., but that wind was abnormal in the sense of, like, you have dealt with probably 25, 20 mile per hour winds in Lambeau from time to time throughout Rodgers' career. 40 plus miles per hour, that's very unusual. So
top 3 games he's played.
And there were a number of throws where you saw the ball kind of get away from both quarterbacks. So I don't, for a little bit, I can say, okay, yes, it's an anomaly. We can move on from it, hopefully learn from it. And then you turn around and you look and, oh, hey, here are the 49ers on Thursday, who all the reports this afternoon come pouring out about. Kittle's going to be out. He's out probably for the rest of the year. Garoppolo's out for the time being. We already knew they were down Bosa, Richard Sherman, Mostert's been out, blah, blah, blah. So they'll be piloting a skeleton crew. And I'm still petrified of this 49ers team simply because of Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you have Kyle Shanahan and he's kind of, I don't know, handed Mike Pettin his lunch over the course of the last, couple times they've played. But in a way, if you're Matt LaFleur, I'm not saying that he's going to make this a win or go home situation for Mike Pettin, but like, at some point, if you go into San Francisco and Kyle Shanahan hands Mike Pettin his lunch for the third straight time and he can't stop that skeleton crew of a team, like what other choice do you have at that point? Because if you can't beat that team or that coach with that team, it's not going to get any better than that. So you have a major issue that you probably need to address right then and there with an extended bye week. Now, I'm not the hoorah rah fire everyone kind of guy. I get people's lives are here and whatever, but at some point you got to stop the team that's across from you. And I just think that
it's a results business, and the results continue to come back the same again and again and again when presented with certain opponents and certain kind of schemes. And look, I understand you don't want to overreact, but I don't think overreacting after getting your ass kicked, like you say, what would be 3 times, and then also coming on the heels of that Minnesota game, where I always kind of go back to what Mike Pettin talked about this offseason when we talked to him about, okay, are you worried about teams? I think it was Silverstein who asked him, like, are you worried about teams trying to replicate what the Niners did? And Mike was very smug about, well, not everybody has the horses they have, and teams are welcome to try. Well, guess what? The Vikings tried, and they kicked your ass. So if that continues, if there's any semblance of teams kind of going, okay, we're just going to button it up. And now, obviously not everybody has a Dalvin Cook. Not everybody has a Kyle Shanahan. So these are specific to those teams, and I understand that. But eventually, you would think giving up historical games to either a Mostert or a Dalvin Cook again and again and again, at some point, don't the results matter at least a little bit?
Well, they do. And I thought Matt LaFleur put it perfectly when he said the formula has been written. Like the formula to beat the Packers is on paper. And unless they change the equation, unless they figure out something where they can stop the run, and what I've always said is basically eating your vegetables on early down so you can rush the passer and have your desserts on third down. I don't see what changes long term. And I guess maybe the good news is things are trending right now that Dalvin Cook and Kyle Shanahan won't be in the playoffs. So maybe you won't have to, go against that sort of kryptonite, but you can't lend it on, the matchups that you get and hope you get favorable matchups in the playoffs, because at some point you're going to, face really good teams. And even let's say for kicks and giggles at this point that you get to the Super Bowl and you have to go against a Baltimore Ravens team that can be so multiple on offense, or you have even the Tennessee Titans later this year with Derrick Henry, there's some, traps along the way that they still have to figure out, because if they can't stop the run, it's a problem, period.
Absolutely. So we know that the world of COVID and the football and Green Bay Packers specifically have collided today with the report that, obviously there is a positive test in-house, and they obviously announced it, and the transaction wire confirmed that it is, A.J. Dillon, who is now quarantining. What do you think LaFleur does if they have to quarantine the entire running back group? Because that's a realistic possibility. We saw something akin to that with the Buffalo Bills, who basically had to sit down almost their entire tight end group, yet the game went on. I think there's a possibility that the NFL could possibly move this game still, especially if maybe we get more positive tests tomorrow. But say they're adamant the game's going to be played on Thursday, and we have Dexter Williams available, possibly?
Maybe if he could easily have still been in those meetings too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
honestly,
maybe Aaron Jones wasn't in those meetings. Maybe he was off. Who knows?
The interesting thing is there's a very good chance that Tyler Ervin was not in those meetings, because he's basically been a wide receiver all year long. So you could see a heavy dose of Tyler Ervin at running back, and you could see a lot of 3, 4, 5 wide receiver sets just to kind of put your best players out there. But hopefully it doesn't come to that. It's at least nice to know that maybe there's an off chance possibility that Tyler Ervin avoided it because he's been in the wide receiver room all year long. But it's not ideal in any way, shape, or form. And I'm with you. I think if you do get a handful of these, and especially if an entire position group is going to be out, I could easily, especially if it's because they have to go on the COVID list because they were in contact, not because they tested positive, and they think that these guys are going to be available on Tuesday. I don't think NFL will have too much of an issue doing another, doubleheader on Monday night or a Tuesday night game rather than doing it on Thursday.
Yeah, that's where I tend to think this is going, but we'll see. I think tomorrow obviously will tell a lot. Okay, quickly before I let you go, we're talking to Andy Herman here on Cheesehead TV, because he's the grand poobah of all things Packers, including Pack a Day podcast, which everyone should be checking out daily. Let's talk. I want to end on something positive. Let's look at the play of Tunyon and Sternberger, because Look, there's a lot of hand wringing about wide receivers. I understand why. We all know where I fall in this position at this point. I know, as you started off the stream talking about how the real kind of worry this offseason wasn't about wide receivers. It was about, the defense and the front in particular trying to stop the run. But you look at everything Matt LaFleur has ever talked about 5 eligibles, right? Rather than looking at the wide receiver group, look at the eligibles. And I thought the eligibles, so to speak, really showed up yesterday, whether it was guys out of the backfield, but especially Sternberger and Tunyon, really encouraging that they were as involved as they were throughout the game yesterday. And I think a large part of that was because you did see a lot of cover 2.
And how much would we be talking about Robert Tunyon right now if the last 2 weeks Rodgers hit him in stride?
Right.
Last week arguably could have been a touchdown, if not maybe 20, 30 more yards on that play. And this week, for sure, in my opinion, would have been a touchdown. And again, wind plays a factor, whatever. I'm not dragging Rodgers here. But if Tunyon gets both of those balls in stride with where he was open on the play, we're talking about a guy who's now had 100-yard receiving games. He had
Right.
the 3 touchdown game. Now he has 2 more touchdowns. Like, we're talking about a really
We're talking about George Kittle,
not
maybe George Kittle light with the lack of a real kind of punishing blocker. The one I will say though, in Rodgers' defense, and I know, like you said, you're not dragging Rodgers, but if you look at Tunyon on that route where, he does, I don't know, he has not slips, but he has like a weird kind of double thing where he like kind of pauses for a second and then comes out of his break, and I think that just kind of threw the timing off. The same thing happened on the Sternberger one where Rodgers seemingly airmails Sternberger. But if you go back and you look at the route, Sternberger kind of almost not stops, but he pauses his route a bit as he watches, because it's a crosser with Devontae. He lets Devontae clear. And then it's like he never stops, but he certainly kind of pauses the route for a second and that's just enough, right? That's the timing aspect of it. But at least, like you said, on the Tunyon one, he went and got it, and it's a huge gain. But their contributions were notable, I thought.
I agree. And I think, when you talk about 5 eligibles, I still think, and why I'm, again, so adamant about defensive line for a variety of reasons being the main key here, I think a passing offense that's set around Tunyon, Sternberger, Allen Lazard, Devontae Adams, and Aaron Jones, when you can do so much out of that, you can run with 2 tight ends and Aaron Jones as your back. You can set all 5 of them wide if you want to, and all 5 of them can beat you if you have the wrong matchup. I just think that formation gives you a ton of flexibility. And if you look at from a playing time standpoint, the 4 eligibles that got the most playing time outside of, I'm just talking about wide receivers and tight ends here in this game, it was MVS, Adams, Tunyon, and Sternberger. So you put in Lazard for MVS, you put in Jones for Williams, and I just think that becomes that much more potent. And I've really liked what I've seen out of all 5 of those players this year. The weapons are there in offense. You have Rodgers, you have LaFleur, an offensive line that's blocking great. Would it be cool to have a Will Fuller? Hell yeah, it would be cool to have a Will Fuller.
Yeah, I'll take it.
But, I would much rather have a defensive line that's been leaky for a season plus now, get some help along there and fix that, because I like what I've seen out of the weapons on offense.
Totally agree. Couldn't agree more. I'm talking to Andy Herman. Andy, you are an absolute legend for joining me. Quick turnaround, probably. We'll see what happens tomorrow and the rest of the week, but hopefully we watch the Packers kind of wash this one away on Thursday night. Thanks so much for joining me, man.
Thanks, Aaron. Always love talking.